Teachers, what is the most stupid answer someone has ever given on an exam? Story 1. Not a teacher, but in the final exam at school, one particularly lazy kid wrote his name on the front so it would count, then proceeded to fall asleep on and drool all over his exam. I want to know what happened to the kid's test, asking for a friend. Well, I don't know about that, but in Season 1, Episode 3 of Boy Meets World, Alan lets Corey stay up late to watch a baseball game, and he fell asleep on the test. One memorable part of the dialogue went like this. Mr. Feeney: "The test is done, Mr. Matthews." Corey: "How'd I do?" Mr. Feeney: "Looks like an A." Corey: "I got an A?" Mr. Feeney: "No, A is the only answer you put down before you slipped into your coma." Corey: "So what'd I get?" Mr. Feeney: "Well, you answered one question out of 40, and you got it wrong. What grade do you think I'm going to give you?" Corey: "Can it be found at the beginning of the word fajita?" Mr. Feeney: "Si, senor." Anyway, Alan and Mr. Feeney argued about a makeup test, with Feeney deciding not to grant one. In the end, both understood each other's perspective, and Alan no longer woke his kid up for baseball so he'd be ready for school. And Feeney granted the makeup test, remembering the hurt of his own dad never doing anything with him as a kid. The moral for Corey was that sometimes there's no right answer in life. There's going to be a moral gray area. This specific knowledge of Boy Meets World makes me want to be your friend. Story 2. Not a teacher, but my dad was. He taught French. Best translation ever from French to English as part of a longer text, not just this sentence. Elle marcha le long de la rue avec un matelas barbu. She walked down the street with a bearded mattress. We can only imagine the look on the poor kid's face when they wrote that, trying desperately to figure out what the heck was going on. Mattress? Mattress? What the frick? But that's what it says. Matelas does not equal matelot. I used to teach English to French kids. One of them, who was actually one of my best pupils, a really smart and hard-working girl, wrote a story about a very scary castle in which there were bald smiles. Now guess what a bald smile actually is. Hint, it's an animal. Story 3. One of my teachers said that as they were marking Year 12 finals, someone responded to an essay question with, "I don't know, but here's a picture of a bird," and then drew a really beautiful bird. Former teacher here, this is actually a decent strategy. I had to use a particular grading rubric. Under that rubric, this answer would get an F, or 51%. A blank answer would get 0%. Stupid? Yes. But they were the rules. So draw your birds, people. You just never know. This is too funny, as in my language, Slovak, the word bird is also used in a meaning dong. So that sentence can be in Slovak interpreted as, so draw your dongs, people. Draw vaginas, too. Don't want to discriminate. Story 4. College English professor here. Though the dumbest exam answer I ever saw came from one of my fellow TAs in a huge lecture hall film class back when I was still a grad student. For some unfathomable reason, one of his students decided to answer the written final exam in the form of a poem that didn't begin to answer any of the exam questions, nor did it reference any of the movies we watched in class, which you had to pick from for the answers, but instead just threw in references to whatever random movies he could work into his rhyme scheme, and even setting all that aside, this student still had zero talent for poetry. I don't know what the heck he was thinking, but my friend decided to generously give the student a 20% for bothering to show up and at least write something down. I think the guy knew he was going to fail, or that he knew nothing on the topic, so he decided, screw it, I'll write a poem. Maybe I'll get a mark or two. Beats an empty sheet, I guess. And it did. So what if one of the movies was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and he was paying an homage to Vogue on poetry? Story 5. I was teaching AP Environmental Science. I had a kid in the class who really shouldn't have been, but it was the only science that fit into his schedule, and our counselors were morons. The test was about water management, and the question itself was about wastewater treatment, something like, identify 2 materials which would be removed from wastewater by primary treatment. The kid, who was an 11th grader, said diapers and doo-doo. We assume he meant diapers and feces. I really hope so anyway. Upvote for counselors are morons comments. It's amazing how much they can wreck kids' lives if they don't do their jobs. I had a counselor who had me sign up for statistics. The next semester she told me she had recommended the wrong statistics class, and I had to take the other one. The semester after that, she asked why I took a second statistics class when the first one satisfied my requirements. She didn't wreck my life, obviously, but that was darn annoying. Story 6. It was supposed to be a lengthy subjective answer on a particular concept, and instead the student starts with a line of concept, answers a story based on a movie, and ends with adding another conceptual line in the end. I think this is a common trick. Make the first and last lines relevant and fill the middle with garbage, assuming nobody will read it. Imagine reading 50 to 100 essays per class on a weekly basis. A lot of skimming involved. I once snuck in a recipe for chocolate cake to see if a teacher was even reading the papers. He did not notice. I got an A. We had journal writing in my school, and I'd insert random lines like, Sherlock Holmes was a great detective who could solve anything. Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock Holmes, the great detective, or anything else similar. The teacher never noticed. I got away with converting over half a page sometimes into random Sherlock Holmes talk. I have no clue why I was using Sherlock Holmes, was the first thing I thought of, and just stuck, I guess. Story 7. Not a teacher. One time I didn't study at all for a test. I left almost all the answers blank. The very last question was the only one I got marks for. The question was, what is a haiku? Please define and provide an example. My haiku was, I have failed this test. I should have studied harder. I hate myself, man. My teacher wrote, for sure, and I got full marks. I studied for the rest of the tests that year. Haikus are the most overhyped thing in literature to me. I remember when I first learned about them, I was like, this is it? This is the amazing stuff you said our next lesson would be? It didn't translate to English well, as a form of poem. It makes so much more sense in Japanese. Story 8. Obligatory, not a teacher, but in A&P school, aircraft mechanics school, there was a question on a test, how do you measure cable tension? Regarding flight control cables from the cockpit to control surfaces, one student put down, ammeter. What the frick? Electrical conductivity in a wire does depend on tension, so in principle you could measure cable tension by hooking up a known voltage to the cable relaxed and then seeing how the current changes when it's put under tension. Presumably that's not how it's actually done. I certainly wouldn't know, but the idea isn't completely ridiculous. The core technology of the multimeter is also used as a platform for other devices, most famously thermometers. Go look up what a thermocouple is. But there are a whole host of other plugins that exploit its ability to detect small changes in voltage and current, including, yes, tension gauges. Story 9. Obligatory, not a teacher, but before I had my history teacher, who liked to put funny answers on tests that were clearly wrong, she had put Apu Nahasa Pima Petalon among historical Babylonian figures on a test, and people actually picked the answer unironically. Studying is important, folks. Looking back, it may not have been Babylonian, but may have been related to the Huns or Mongols. Can't remember fully, but it was something within that vein. I took an astronomy class. If I remember, the question was, what is dark matter? One of the answers was something like, the matter that helps produce the dark side of the force. I'm sure someone picked that answer. If I was confident in the rest of my answers, I would have picked that also. Who needs the Quickie Mart? These people do. Story 10. I can provide something stupid I did myself multiple times. Me and my friends had this meme, I guess, where the answer to every question we didn't know would either be 6, 42, or Jesus. One day we had a science exam, which I didn't do anything for, so I said screw it and answered all the questions with one of these 3 answers. Fun thing is that for one question I filled in 42, and it was actually within the margin of error. Answer was 43, so I got 1 point for that, bumping my total grade from a 1 to a 1.1. I can understand Jesus in 42, but what about 6? I honestly don't remember where it came from originally. It just became a meme in our friend group. We used to call those inside jokes. Story 11. I am in a 1-to-1 school. Every student is issued an iPad, so I use a digital quiz that my students can type on. I can't remember what the question was, but I remember the student's answer. It was a pizza emoji. Actually, this is pretty smart, since some databases aren't prepared to store emojis. It could have been stored as a corrupted text and tell the professor that he answered correctly. Nope, it was from an EL student who just didn't understand the question. It was basically his version of a shrugging. That was the point when I realized that perhaps he didn't understand quite as much English as he let on. No, he was an IT genius, and he cracked the code on which emoji would corrupt the data file for the quiz. It was the eggplant emoji, but his finger slipped and you got pizza instead. Story 12. I teach English as a foreign language in China, learning about professions. Model answer, Question, what do you want to be? Answer, I want to be a blank. Students answer, I want to be a potato. As people seem to be enjoying this, in the same spoken test, another student mispronounced vet. I want to be a pet. We all dream of different things. Do you mock the aspirations to tuberhood? Story 13. Ex-primary school teacher, 5 to 11 for non-UK people here, science lesson based on the water cycle. Towards the end of the lesson, a student asked if this was how kettles make clouds under their kitchen worktops. Obviously meant steam building up. This is where I messed up. Rather than dismissing the concept and focusing on only the water cycle, I responded, kind of, yes, before proceeding to explain the differences between that of the water cycle and that of how steam is produced, and why it builds up under the cabinets. It rises, you see it when it cools, etc., whilst comparing and contrasting the two. About 2 months later, a science exam, opening line, all of Earth's clouds start out in kettles. Story 14. Not a teacher, I was the student that gave a stupid answer. On the true or false section of a midterm that I took in high school, I wasn't sure about one of the questions, so I wrote an FT hybrid that I had seen on iFunny. My teacher was amused and pointed out the cleverness of my attempt to trick him into giving me the points for that question, and I thanked him. Then he asked me what the right answer was, and I gave him the correct answer. You see, after turning in my test, I looked in my notes to find out the answer to that question out of curiosity. He accepted my answer, and the explanation as to why it was correct, and I aced the test. Story 15. Technically not an answer, but for the AP test, and possibly many other standardized tests, my classmate took advantage of the rule where the grader has to disregard anything the student crosses out with a single line. After finishing his essay for the AP US History exam, he wrote an elaborate story of a unicorn and its essential role in the development of the US and crossed it out with a single line. Several years ago when I was taking APs, I wrote, magnets, how do they work? At the top of every question on my electricity and magnetism physics test. I did something like this for my AP Psych exam, except I wrote the entirety of All-Star by Smash Mouth and then crossed it out. Story 16. My dad once told me about one of his students complaining she missed a point because the topic of the question wasn't covered in class. The question, can you get pregnant from a handshake? He was teaching freshman med students. That sounds like one of those too simple to be easy questions that has a hidden answer. Like maybe it's possible to get pregnant from a handshake in specific, very ridiculous circumstances. It depends on the location of the handshake. No, not really. Unless the hand has sperm on it, the female is upside down and the hand just kinda sits in the vagina, letting the sperm slowly drip in there. This is also how Kif gets pregnant in Futurama. Story 17. Not a teacher, but I once wrote the entire lyrics of Let It Go from Frozen in both English and in my language. It doesn't seem that stupid if it's not a very important exam. It was an exam that selected students to go to international competition. I, being almost 14 at the time, got called out in front of the entire hall in university. The professor scolded me that I waste very important opportunities, plus waste the budget of government, and said that I was a reason that my country didn't develop. Depending on your personality, that's either a point of pride or a point of shame. Story 18. I'm not a teacher, but I know someone who spelled their own name wrong on an exam. I remember being so nervous for an exam once that I forgot what year it was and which grade I was in. Nerves can mess you up. Yep, first time traveling overseas, I filled out the customs form and was pulled aside by the customs guy and questioned why I wrote Caucasian in the nationality box. I honestly didn't. My brain was just shut down after 14 hours in the air. You time traveled overseas? Wow, when? Story 19. My mom was a teacher. She was doing a geography quiz with years 7 and 8, 6th or 7th grade. One of the questions was, what was the biggest island until Australia was discovered? One kid answered, trick question, Australia isn't real. Edit, this was a while ago, before Australia was classified as a continent. I hope you're an Aussie. Oh, Australia isn't real. Kevin, we live in Australia. Existential crisis ensues. Story 20. Who is considered America's founding father? George W. Bush. Well, George is right. 1/3 marks? George W. is also technically right, but without his full last name. Can we give this man 2/3 marks? I feel like Bush is pretty close, being a president, and should be worth a half point. 5 out of 6 marks. Story 21. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in primary school, I was so lazy during a math test that I didn't recheck my finished script despite having 10 minutes to go and the teacher constant reminders. Turns out I had accidentally flipped 2 pages of the exam script together and left the middle 2 pages completely blank. Guess there's a reason why practically every big exam I ever took started with a reminder to check that we had the correct amount of pages in our test. I remember my friend doing that on finals. He somehow still passed it though. Story 22. Which planet in our solar system contains the highest concentration of toxic gas? Uranus. Alright, I giggled. What do toilet paper and the Starship Enterprise have in common? They both circle around Uranus looking for Klingons. Out of curiosity, is the answer Venus? Story 23. I've had several pleading answers saying they haven't got a clue, but please, can I give them some marks? My husband once wrote an apology in his religious education essay. He said he knew he wasn't going to pass, and he was sorry the examiner had to read his paper. No, he did not pass. No wonder he didn't pass. The professor wanted an apology. Pretty different thing, despite the name. I had those, along with the paragraph essay on how they're pre-med and can't fail this course. Perhaps studying next time, yes? Story 24. Took a world religions class in high school, got a test question, what is the term for hostility and discrimination against Judaism? Response is anti-Semitism, of course, but teacher, in a tired voice, said someone answered Christianity. I mean, from a historical perspective, he's not wrong. Hilarious, though. From a biblical perspective, the Jews hated the Christians. Well, then you are lost. Story 25. Also not a teacher, but in 7th grade I took a grammar test. It was 10 questions, 3 points apiece. I missed every question and forgot to put my name on the test. I was given a -3 out of 30. I mean, I wouldn't put my name on work like that. Academically dumb, but in the real world, being self-aware can be important. B-. Story 26. Just the other day, the question asked the learners to explain the myth in the passage. Answer: a myth is a female moth. And I just sort of looked at this answer for a while before realizing the extent of stupid answers. Hey myth, do you mind if I poop here? Mike Tyson. Mothra didn't answer, but fluttered her wings mysteriously. Mithra. Story 27. Math teacher here. The worst I've ever had was from a 16-year-old who was asked to draw a pie chart. This is my favorite. I can't make sense of that thought process. He saw the first part was a right angle facing upwards, so therefore the rest must also be right angles facing upwards. I think I had an aneurysm trying to understand how the bicycle is pointing directly up like the others. Story 28. Science teacher here. Funniest answer? Question. Name a good source of protein. Answer: platypus. Most stupid answer? Question. Why do you hear thunder after you see lightning? Answer: because sound travels slower than noise. Story 29. Whoa, not a teacher, what a surprise. We were given a creative writing exam based on a prompt. In other words, someone gives you words and you have to make a story with that in mind. Our prompt was the bridge. One of my mates simply wrote down, the bridge, the end. Keep in mind this exam was a nationwide thing, so it was pretty darn important. Story 30. Not a teacher, but I used to tutor high school kids. This kid needed help with an upcoming English literature test, so I spent 2 hours explaining Chaucer's Canterbury Tales to him. Then I started quizzing him. I had a printout with mock questions, and I started with the easiest one. In the Canterbury Tales, where are the pilgrims going? Answer: to Santiago de Compostela. He was dead serious too. I believe this explains why I did not go into teaching. Story 31. I had a friend who was really smart in college. He even did exercise courses in game theory and contract law and economics. He had an exam where he didn't study that much, but at the bottom he posted a picture of Gandalf with the text, "You shall not pass." He was 100% sure he wouldn't pass, but got an A. I've seen both his assignment and the grade because I didn't believe him. Story 32. After over 20 years of teaching, my favorite is, question, which year did the American Revolution start? Answer: in France. To this day, I have no idea what went through the student's mind because I never found it in me to ask for an explanation. Story 33. Not a teacher, but I had to write an English test essay on our topic for the semester. Sadly, though, I forgot we had the test, so I forgot all my notes. So for an hour straight, I just wrote, "I am a fish," over and over again. I somehow managed to convince my friend to write the same thing on her leftover papers so that I wouldn't be the only stupid one. Is your name Arnold Rimmer? Story 34. Not a teacher, but a student. Our teacher used to read us dumb answers some of us wrote. There was a picture of Boston, and the question was, which city is this? The kid said, France. France! And to this day, we bug him. He also said the Nile is in our country. We live in Eastern Europe. Humiliating students for their wrong answers in front of class is how you give them terrible anxiety in future exams. Screw teachers who do that. Story 35. Math teacher here. One question had a graph with a bunch of points on it, and students were asked to state the range of the graph. Except I teach in French, and the word for range is image, which is also a translation for the English word image. Students connect the dots in whatever way they wanted, and the sketch they ended up with kind of looked like a snail. So their answer to the range of the graph? Un escargot. Story 36. Not a teacher, but a student who tried to cheat in our statistics exam and failed horribly. In our exam, we had 2 sets, A and B. The first test of both sets was multiple choice. The choices for set A were from 1 to 6, while the choices from set B were A to F. Guy probably had a picture of the test from a friend and didn't notice the sets because even though he got set A, his answers were a negative F. Story 37. Not a teacher, but my mother is. Once she came back from her lunch break to find 2 of her students taking pictures of the exam key, she immediately rewrote the exam and gave them both zeros. Later, one of the students' mothers calls and says she's suing because her daughter wouldn't be able to get into the university she wanted to if she bombed this test. Before you ask, yeah, I live in California. Story 38. My geography teacher used to mark GCSE exam papers in the summer for a bit of extra money. He told us the dumbest thing was a paper some girl had taken and not done very well in. He got to the last question, a 12-mark essay, and she's just written a list of all her friends and their current boyfriends. Clearly, she realized she was going to fail anyway and didn't want to put the effort in. Story 39. In India, one of my friends said, Gai hamara mata hai, mujhko kuch nahin aata hai. Basically, cow is my mother, I don't know poop. You could scream this in the street and I'd swear you're about to use a stand to throw me into the shadow realm to collect the Dragon Balls. Story 40. Not an answer, but they raised their hand to ask a question, the hand with all the answers written on it. Why would he ask a question if he had all the answers? Maybe to avoid looking suspicious? Well, he really nailed that one. Story 41. 1970s. In my sister's science class, one question was, what is red tide? Another kid's answer was, it's the influx of Chinese communists in Southeast Asia. Teacher gave him a -2 on that one for being a smart butt. Story 42. Not a teacher, but when grading a quiz, we graded each other's. On South Africa and world history, the girl that I was grading said that Africa was a country in South America. How are some people this stupid? Story 43. Not a teacher, but our teacher showed us. It was a bio test, and the question was about how the villi in the intestine worked, and thus person answered with, impulses are sent to the muscle to pump blood. And I think about that every bio test. Story 44. A student writes stuff like BTC or WHM on blanks on math tests. He's 10 and can't read. How he got to 3rd grade, I don't know. I've been calling attention to him in meetings for 2 months now, and nothing. Story 45. I once had a student write the following in an essay. Everything I know about the Civil War came from the movie Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I teach college. Story 46. Not a teacher, but my mom is, and she had me grade her tests on occasion. One time someone said that Thomas Paine wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Story 47. Victor Frankenstein and Hamlet are both characters created by William Shakespeare. Happened 10 years ago. I'm still shaking my head. Story 48. My friend's sister once wrote, birth control makes women smell bad, so men won't sleep with them in her biology exam. Story 49. Why is there a high fructose content in sperm cells? To make it taste better. Story 50. What is dehydration synthesis? Well, you know Hot Pockets? It's not that. Story 51. Jesus is always the answer. I'm pretty sure I failed that test. Click on one of the videos you see on the screen now, or a Karen will sue you.